This video is looking at your muscle anatomy, lab portion. So we will cover, as always, physiology and lecture, the function of the muscles. Here we're going to be looking at the anatomy of muscles. There are over 600 skeletal muscles that help you perform your daily task. Now keep in mind, remembering that there are 3 types of muscle. You have your skeletal, your smooth, and your cardiac. Your skeletal muscles alone make up for more than 600. The type we're going to be identifying mostly in class is going to be your skeletal muscles, though you do need to know the histology of all 3 types of muscles. You had looked at this in your histology and had to identify and distinguish between skeletal, smooth, and cardiac muscle. And let's go over that. So remembering that your skeletal muscles, and I'm going to jump forward a little bit here, remembering that your skeletal muscles are going to be multinucleated. That means they're going to have more than one nucleus. And those nuclei will usually be kind of squished to the edges. And you can see that here. Okay. It's also going to be a striated muscle. So both your cardiac and your skeletal muscles will be striated. And you can see that there. You can see all of these lines going across the muscle, right? So this is one muscle cell here. And you can see all those striations, these lines going across it. You can see those striations as well over here in the cardiac muscle. So I'm going to highlight one cardiac muscle cell that I want you to look at right here, highlighting it in yellow. And you know that's just one cardiac muscle cell because it's separated by those intercalated discs. Okay. And if you remember, your intercalated discs are going to be these guys here, these big lines that are found in cardiac muscle. You don't find them in skeletal or smooth muscle, only in cardiac muscle. And they actually serve as connections between 2 cells and to help with the cardiac impulse. You'll learn more about that in 169 when you actually look at the cardiovascular system. But for now, I want you to know that their intercalated discs are important for the functions of cardiac muscle working as a unit. And you find them in between separate cardiac muscle cells. Right? You can see the striations as well. So all of these little striations that are going down and across like that. Different from your skeletal muscle, which has many nuclei. Your cardiac muscle will only have one nucleus generally, and that one nucleus will be central. So it's going to be in the center. And you can see that here. See how that nucleus is in the center of the cell as opposed to the many nuclei of the skeletal muscle, which are usually squished to the edges. Okay. And again, they're both striated. So you're going to have striations in both your skeletal and your cardiac. This is going to be different from your smooth muscle. Smooth is called smooth because it has no striations, making it very different, right? No striations. And the other thing you're going to notice is it has only one, generally only one nucleus as well. Okay. And that nucleus will tend to be centralized as well. And so your smooth muscle, as you can see here, it looks very different from both your skeletal and your cardiac muscle. Because you are not trying to compare this to your dense, regular connective tissue, which is what this looks like most similarly, you're going to be able to identify more easily because you're just having to compare it to the skeletal and the cardiac muscle here. Okay. This chart here helps go over those 3 types of muscle cells. Again, your skeletal with your striated multinucleated, your cardiac with striated, usually just one centrally located nucleus, and then your smooth muscle that appears it has no striations and it has only one nucleus. Remember also that your skeletal muscle is the only one that is voluntary. The other 2 are going to be for involuntary. The cardiac is for the involuntary beating of your heart. The smooth vessel is for the involuntary movement of the muscle found in organs, glands, ducts, blood vessels, etc. Anything that is voluntary, all those skeletal muscles of your body, okay, that help move your tongue, your mouth, part of your throat, your eyes, your nose, your smile, your head, etc. All of those are going to be voluntary and they are going to be attached to bone. Right, so make sure you do know the basic histology for your lab portion. All right, for the rest of this lab, I'm going to concentrate on skeletal muscle. So in histology, I do have you distinguish between skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. For the rest of this lab, we're going to focus solely on skeletal muscle. Okay, so your skeletal muscle, remembering, is attached to bones, so it's required for the movement of your body. Okay, and along with your skeletal bones, it's going to act as a system of levers and pulleys to move your body parts. Okay, and we're going to look at how those work. So the first thing I want to point out is the basic structure, the basic anatomy of the skeletal muscle. Okay, so this is taking this bicep. This is your biceps brachii, it's called. Biceps brachii. From now on, don't use just the word biceps for talking about the muscle found in your upper arm that's covering your humerus, because there are actually two types of biceps. You have your biceps femoris, which is covering the thigh bone, which is your femur, and you have the biceps brachii covering your upper arm, your humerus. So to be able to distinguish them, they are known as biceps brachii and biceps femoris. When identifying them for your exam, you must write biceps femoris or biceps brachii. Biceps alone would not be acceptable. All right, so this one's taking the biceps and looking at it in more detail. So first thing I want you to remember is something we talked about in the skeletal system. There are ligaments and there are tendons. Ligaments hold bone to bone. Tendons hold bone to muscle. And so this is your humerus right here. This bone right here we're looking at is your humerus. And this here is the tendon that is holding the muscle to the humerus. Here, I want you to know that this external covering, the outermost covering of the muscle is called your epimysium, and it actually connects, it is continuous with the tendon. So we'll actually connect directly with the tendon, holding it to the bone. Okay. So your epimysium is the outermost. Perimysium is underneath your epimysium, and it's actually what covers something called fascicles. So a muscle is basically a bundle within bundles within bundles. Okay. Your muscle is an entire round thing made of many separate bundles of muscle cells. Each bundle of a muscle cell is called a fascicle. And each fascicle is then composed of hundreds of muscle cells. So you have hundreds of muscle cells making up each fascicle, and many fascicles, dozens of fascicles to hundreds of fascicles make up one muscle. So you actually have thousands of muscle cells in just one muscle. Epimysium covers the entire muscle. Perimysium covers the entire fascicle. And then endomysium covers each individual muscle cell. Muscle cells are also called muscle fibers. So you're going to find that word also. It can be used, you can use them indistinguishably. So you can either choose to use the word muscle cell or you can use the word muscle fiber when talking about muscles. Okay, please know this one completely. You can expect to be quizzed on this in your lab portion of your exam. All right, skeletal muscles are going to mostly work in opposition to each other. That means you generally have one muscle cell that's called an agonist and another muscle cell that's going to be called an antagonist. And so how this works is one muscle contracts while the other one relaxes. And then when the muscle that was relaxed starts to contract, then the other one automatically starts to relax. So they do the opposite. A good example of this that you see right here in this image, this is your scapula. So this here is your humerus. And then you have your radius and your ulna, right? Okay. So these two muscles that we're looking at then are going to be, this one is your biceps brachii. And you probably can guess which one this one is, right? This one's what is called your triceps, or we normally call triceps. Again, you can't just leave it at triceps. It's your triceps brachii. Why is it brachii? Why is it biceps brachii and why is it triceps brachii? Well, I'm having trouble writing that word. Well, if you remember that this area, the area of the upper arm, is called the brachial region. And it's called the brachial region because there's actually a famous artery going through this called the brachial artery. So this is your brachial region. And therefore you have your biceps brachii and your triceps brachii located in this brachial region, right? Okay, so when your biceps brachii contracts, your triceps relax. And you can see this by putting out your arm, and then I want you to bring your hand up towards your shoulder. When you bring your hand up towards your shoulder, you're going to feel that biceps contracting. And if you put your other hand underneath your triceps, you will feel it. You will feel that muscle relax as your biceps contracts. And then if you release back down your arm, you're going to feel that biceps relax while that triceps is contracting. So they work in opposition. One contracts or shortens while the other one relaxes or lengthens. Okay, when a muscle contracts, it actually shortens. It actually becomes shorter. When a muscle relaxes, it actually becomes longer. So it lengthens. I'm having trouble writing the word right now. Lengthens. Okay? So keep that in mind when you're thinking about muscles. Continuing with how the muscle cells look. So we talked about the structure of a skeletal muscle, remembering again that each muscle is composed of many fascicles, and each individual fascicle is composed of many muscle cells. Now let's look at the anatomy of each individual muscle cell. Remember, a muscle fiber is another word for muscle cell. And this is what each muscle cell will look like. Down here, this is an image of a muscle cell. This here is one. What you're looking at right here is one muscle cell. So both of these are views, right? So this is your muscle cell or muscle fiber. And you can see how it's round, and it's going to be composed of many little round guys, which are called myofilaments. Okay? And then we're going to look, these are called myofilaments or myofibrils. Oh, the name is right here. Myofibrils, good, right there. And then we're going to take each one of these and look at it individually. Okay. So here you can see there are some key parts you do need to know about your muscle cell of the individual anatomy of a muscle cell. Okay. First thing you need to know is what actually creates these striations. So these striations are caused by something called your sarcomeres. And your sarcomeres are going to be a repeating pattern. So this here, your sarcomere, is a repeating pattern of I-band, A-band, I-band. And your muscle cell will be a continuous repeating pattern of I-band, A-band, I-band, I-band, A-band, I-band, I-band, over and over again. You're going to have this repeating pattern over and over and over again. And this, each time you have an IAI, it's called one sarcomere. So you're going to have a sarcomere next to a sarcomere next to a sarcomere. And your sarcomeres are actually your unit of muscle contraction. We will talk about how the muscle contracts in your lecture portion of the class. For now, I just want you to know the basic anatomy, and then in class, we'll look at how the sarcomere actually goes about doing the muscle contraction. Right? Your eye bands are called eye bands because they're light in color. And easy to remember, the word light has only one vowel, which is I, so I band for light. Your A bands are a dark band. They're dark. And the vowel in the word dark is A. So therefore, it's called your A band. A band for dark, I band for light. So when you're looking at that muscle cell under the microscope that we looked at before, so let's go up real fast. Remember the skeletal muscle cell we were looking at? And you can see here these striations, right? Over and over again, these dark bands coming down. That's exactly what it is. Every time you see that line that's a dark band, that's actually called an A band. And in between the A band isn't blank space. In between each of these A bands that you're looking at, you see what looks like a light color. That light color is your eye band. So what you're looking at here are repeated patterns. 1 sarcomere, 2 sarcomeres, 3 sarcomeres, 4 sarcomeres, 5 sarcomeres, 6 sarcomeres, etc. Because you have the repeating pattern of IAI, 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 right? So you have a light, a dark, a light, a light, a dark, a light. And what you're seeing that look like striations, you're actually only seeing the dark band because they appear dark in the histology. When you're looking at an image of an individual muscle cell. But you see clearly are the dark bands. Right? Other key things to look at are going to be your Z disc. So in your eye bands, there is kind of a squiggly line that forms in the middle of the eye bands, and that's called your Z disc. Okay. And this is actually these squiggly lines. So if you go from one to another, that's your Z disc. Go from one eye band to another eye band from center point of one eye band to center point of another eye band is your Z disc. Your H zone is going to be the center of the dark bands. And then, of course, your sarcomere is going to be that whole entire thing, which is a repeating pattern. And the entire myofibril is going to be made out of 2 types of filaments or proteins known as your actin and your myosin. Okay, they're also called thin filament and thick filament, actin and myosin. And we'll talk about that in more detail in your lecture portion. But suffice to understand that you are going to have a combination of actin and myosin that form light and dark bands that repeat in a repeating unit, also known as your contractile unit, called sarcomeres. All right, let's pause here. The second lab video, we'll start looking at how we actually name the skeletal muscles. So here we looked at the histology of skeletal muscles versus smooth and cardiac. And then we looked at the anatomy of a skeletal muscle and the anatomy of a muscle cell and how muscles work and skeletal muscles work with antagonist and agonist, right? Next, we're going to look at how muscles are actually named, and we're going to name some of those important muscles.